Hello, this is my YouTube version of my homily for the 15th Sunday of Ordinary Time, obviously not being filmed during Mass. We heard in the Gospel today that Jesus sent them out 2 by 2, and basically, this Gospel reading was Evangelization 101. Go forth, spread the word wherever you can find people willing to listen, and move on to the next place when they're not open to the message. And the key that I want to focus on is that evangelization, spreading the good news, is an invitation. We don't force or coerce people into the church. That is not the policy. This was Jesus' style, and he passed it on to his disciples in today's gospel, and that policy continues on to this day. And what I want to spend the day for is, I want to illustrate that this has always been the church's belief, in spite of pockets of history where we had church leaders who did use coercion, fear, maybe heavy-handed authority in order to boost the numbers, as it were. They were not acting on church teaching. They were overstepping their bounds as leaders or evangelizers. If you asked an average person on the street, what chapter of history showed the church being the most aggressive in the proclamation of the faith? I think a reasonably common answer to that question would be the colonization of the New World. I mean, Europe discovered Native Americans, and we just went to town on them, didn't we? That is certainly the story that I learned in public school. There's more to the story than that. I may not like Isaac Asimov all that much. He has said some ridiculous things that I very strongly disagree with. He said one thing that I think is actually very powerful and worth sharing. He said, "It's not science, it is not research, unless you are holding the raw empirical data in your hands." Okay? You need that in order for it to be research. So for us today, a simple Google search is not research. If you want to know what was going on in the 1500s, start by reading surviving documents from that era of history. Pope Paul II, obviously Pope at the time, he wrote a document in 1537 called Sublimus Deus. In it, he makes it abundantly clear that Native Americans should not, and I quote, "be treated like irrational animals and used exclusively for our profit and our service. They must not be deprived of their freedom and their possessions, even if they are not Christians. On the contrary, they must be left to enjoy their freedom and their possessions." And he wraps up this papal document with the principle that everyone is my brother or sister. He wrote that less than 50 years after Columbus discovered the continent and got the whole buzz going. I find this fascinating. About 500 years ago, the church almost immediately declared that Native Americans have inalienable rights, regardless of their religious state, or whether they're willing to assimilate to European culture. And this was generations before Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. I can't prove it. I would like to believe that Pope Paul II had this gospel in mind when he wrote that document. Of course, that also is not the end of the story, because history has proven that it is very easy to ignore the Pope. I am not sitting here and saying that all crimes against humanity ended in 1537. That would be borderline insane. This was a dark chapter of history, and there is blame enough for everybody. However, it is worth stating here and now, any violations against the Native Americans by European settlers was done in explicit rejection of Catholic teaching. Catholics who ignore the Pope and do whatever they want to do are a lot like soldiers who never follow orders. We don't call them soldiers. We call them mercenaries. And I can't help but wonder, how might things have been different if more people seriously listened to the Pope when he called for unequivocal respect for human rights? Just food for thought, food for thought. Anyway, you needed all that background. Let's get back to evangelization, the topic of the day. Forcing people into the faith. It's not a thing. It does not work. It is not what Jesus calls us to do. That being said, we did evangelize the New World really well. So how did that come to be? How did so much of Mexico, Central America, and South America become Catholic so quickly? It's not because we forced them. And the answer is not missionaries. It's not. It is very well documented that even the good missionaries, the ones who never abused their power, the ones that never took advantage of circumstances, the ones who truly just wanted to share their love with Christ with a new people that have never heard the gospel before, even for them, conversions were very rare. It was always an uphill battle. Missionary work is difficult in all eras of history, not just today. They had limited success as missionaries. So I ask one more time, where did the success come from? The answer is Our Lady of Guadalupe. I'm not going to tell you the story because if I start, I won't be able to stop, and this is going to be an hour-long video, and we don't want that. But the short version is that the Virgin Mary interceded on behalf of practically the entire continent, and she invited, again that word, she invited the Native Americans into the church in a way that they could understand and appreciate. Okay? That was something the missionaries couldn't provide themselves. So seriously, if you think I'm glossing over some details, read up on it. Read this stuff. It is an amazing and beautiful story, and it is absolutely true. I may not have a single drop of Hispanic blood in my veins, but I believe to the bottom of my heart, the Virgin Mary loves this part of the world and all who dwell here. So my final point here, getting to the end, evangelization is an invitation, and it must cooperate with divine grace. We can't and won't force people into the church. And evangelization is not purely the product of human willpower. If it was, the missionaries would have been very much more successful than they were. But that's not the way it works. Evangelization is not a clever sales pitch where the best religion is the one with the best salesman. If that's the case, I know I picked the wrong church. But the good news is God is in control. He always has been. Sometimes something amazing happens and an entire continent will grow in holiness. And other times we are called to do our best with limited resources. God does not demand the impossible from us. He wants us to be in right relationship with Him. We do that through prayer, community, and of course, the sacraments. And yes, He does want us to evangelize our neighbors, spread the good news, but to do so by sharing our faith as best as we can. And after we've shared our faith, like these original disciples in the gospel, the rest is frankly in the hands of the Holy Spirit. So let's be at peace with our faith, be generous to our neighbors, and be poor in spirit, that is to say, to trust in the Lord.